sentiments have always existed in the USA, but recently the situation has gotten much worse. The policies of Trump's administration have taken it to another level. How do you think the Trump presidency has affected this issue, and how is this different, if at all, from the history of racism in the US?
A lot of people are seeing what's happening with Trump and saying, oh my, like it's almost like they think that this started with Trump. And unfortunately, and you hear people saying this is not American, the way that Trump has both talked about immigrants and created essentially the largest police force this country has ever seen, which is now disobeying the law. One thing I want you all to know is that some people will call ICE a law enforcement agency. I don't refer to ICE as a law enforcement agency because I think to be a law enforcement agency, you have to be enforcing the law. And some of the very disturbing things that ICE is doing are breaking the law. This is being proven over and over again when those cases go to trial. So I think that what the hard thing I think is for people to face, and I'm a historian. Are people in the classroom, by the way, are you all studying lots of history? I think from your questions you are. Are you all studying it? Raise your hand if you're studying history. Good. I loved historians, I wanted to study history because I was like, I always found the historians felt like to me some of the smartest people because they could tell us how we got to this point. So even though I was trained in journalism, I started making journalism about history. And I think that when you study American history, what you find out is that there's always these fears and anxieties that Americans have had about immigration, but you also find that it's immigrants who have basically built this country and made this country whatever is, positive or strong rights we have. It's been immigrants. I just want to say, going back, if you go back to, the founding of this country, back to like the early 18th century or like the 1790s, what you find is a lot of the immigrants then, who knows what those immigrants look like in terms of their skin color? Those early immigrants, what did they look like?
Well, they had like darker skin, right? Black.
No. The first,
well,
some of the initial immigrants, were like, you had like Irish immigrants who came in during those times. I make a show, by the way, maybe, I don't know if you all have heard, I made a show about the history of the police. And New York's first police force had a rule where they said no Irish people are allowed to be police. And that was because, this was like in the 1840s, all the way back then. So, eventually Irish people were accepted. Then there was worries like, oh, wait a minute, we don't like German people. We don't want German people to come here. And then they were like, we don't want Chinese people. So that all throughout American history, things like what Trump is doing have been, going on. But I think Trump has amplified this to a whole nother level. And a part of it, I think, is because it's just like, one thing I've learned, and maybe you all see this, is that making people scared of people allows you to take their rights more easily. Like if someone said, I want to take Martina's rights, maybe if you just said it like that, no one would agree. But if you said, I think Martina's dangerous, I don't like the way Martina wears her earrings, and I don't like the way Martina talks to people, and Martina's scary. If you can scare and get everybody to be scared of her, then maybe the people are like, okay, you know what? That's cool. You can make Martina go away. And I think that that's what Trump has been very, very good at.
And also, like, looking back to the past and seeing that Trump has amplified this problem, do you see any improvement, like, in any way of, like, differences that, like, have gotten better, like, over the years? Or do you think we're just at its worst point of racism in the U.S.?
I think that, like, in a way, I think that, I don't know if I would say this is the worst point because, America is a country that at one point, people were enslaved explicitly. And there was one point in American history where we could not have been in this situation. Me as a Black African American, and the various kinds of folks who might be Latino in your classroom or other kinds of ethnicities, we wouldn't have even been allowed to be in a school with each other, So, and there's been progress in that regard that people fought. But I think the real progress is that people are now aware of what's going on. So you know, if you've seen, there's been tremendous people saying, no, I don't want you to let you take my neighbor. I don't want you to treat my family that way. I'm not gonna. And there's people who say, I know my rights, and I'm not gonna let you come in and do this. And so the tremendous, I think, sense that people are asking these questions and that they have the right to speak up, people are more courageous, and that has changed. In terms of what the U.S. as a government is doing, I'm afraid I don't see much progress.
It's ironic to think that Trump, the descendant of an immigrant family and having married two immigrants, would take such a hard position against others. According to the American Immigration Center, currently 14.3% of the American population are immigrants. In what way do you think the current U.S. immigration policies are affecting other American citizens and the rest of the world?
Yeah, it's wild, right? Like here, Trump is married to a person who's an immigrant. He's got immigrants in his family, and yet all these policies. I think that, again, the reason why Trump is doing this is because by focusing the attention on immigrants, it allows him to distract from other problems and blame other problems. So if you think about what actually keeps people safe in America and all over the world, what are some of the things that keep people safe? Having good health care, having enough, money and resources to have good shelter and housing, being around the people. I don't know about you all, but I feel safe when I'm around my family and people I love and care about my community. Not having, if environmental things happening, like if you don't want to have a fire or an earthquake, or if there's a flood or something, like how it is when there's a flood and snow in New York. So those to me are the things that keep people safe. But Trump doesn't seem to, and a lot of people who bring up immigration, they don't really want to address those questions. They want to blame immigrants, but when you attack immigrants, the problem is you're literally attacking so many things that help people. I don't know if you all were paying attention or heard or discussed what was happening in Minneapolis, but I talked to some nurses and some doctors, and they said that some of their patients were so scared of ICE that they wouldn't come into the hospital. Like they had two kids that were sick, and there was people were calling in and say, hey, maybe I'd only bring one kid in, or do I have to bring this kid in? And you also had staff, people who were nurses and doctors who themselves wouldn't come in. So not just the sick people, but so think about that. If your policy is making a doctor not come into work because he's scared that he might be taken by ICE, even though the vast majority of the people who are being taken, once they take them and look at their record, they didn't do anything wrong. So is that making us safer? To me, by affecting immigration, Trump is not just affecting immigrants. Now you're affecting the whole country. You're affecting healthcare. You're affecting people who build things and all those problems. And in a way, I wonder, just to go back to the original part of the question, it would be interesting to see how Trump or these people would respond if their own families were treated according to the policies that he set up for other people, right?
Immigration policy in the United States is highly inconsistent, as a news report stated that 86% of immigrants are being arrested by ICE without charges or convictions. What kind of problems do you think this behavior toward immigrants creates, and why do you think ICE can make this arrest without sufficient cause?
Right. Well, thank you for this. Thank you for this question. I think that essentially, one thing that we should point out is that immigration law and criminal law are different things, right? So we shouldn't necessarily combine immigration law with criminal law, because in my mind, if someone hurts someone or robs someone or does something that harms someone, it doesn't matter whether they're an immigrant or whether they're a citizen. It's not like, okay, I robbed a person, but I'm a citizen, so that's okay. So I don't know. So one question is, why is Trump and people who are, leading this, combining immigration law, which are the rules about who is allowed to be here and what rights you have, with criminal law? And I think that part of the consequences of doing that is that one is that you invite people to think, when they think of immigrant, they think of criminal. right? And there's a long history of that. So when people, so you see that, right, in this country, like people think about, I've even heard people that I know like, oh man, those Venezuelans, they're all criminals. And I'm like, what are you talking about, man? You mean this Venezuelan woman who's, works at the grocery store? She's a criminal? No, it's like, so, but when you get, if you're inviting the whole country to think as people as criminals, that's one problem. But again, like the example I gave earlier, it makes it easier to take people's rights. But the other problem is that once you basically say, we can call you a criminal and then we can violate your right. We don't have to actually follow the law and give you due process. You can start to do that to people who are not even immigrants. And that's what I think a lot of people, when they first saw people, there were immigrants saying, hey, our rights are being violated. We want everyone to pay attention. This isn't right. There were some people saying, that's just you. I'm a citizen. I'm safe. But now what you see is all kinds of people being detained and incarcerated, put in jail and treated. And people are realizing that that's why for all of you, I just want to say you all play a really important role because you got to stand up and defend each other. And if you allow an injustice to happen to your classmate, it's eventually that same injustice may happen to you. But either way, even if it just happens to your classmate, it's wrong. But this is what's happening in America is that now there's all these detention centers being built. ICE is violating the rights of all kinds of people. Actually, your skin color it still matters, but we are seeing a lot of people who are white American citizens like Renee Good, who was shot and killed, unfortunately. And I know that's a harsh thing to talk about, but I'm sure you all have seen it. So, anyway, I just think that that idea of criminalizing and getting us to think about immigration as something to do with crime. I mean, one thing I should say, and you all probably know this, the research that I've seen is that people who immigrate to this country are actually more law-abiding than citizens who were born here, if you look at all the research on it. So you have to ask that question. If on a whole, immigrant people, of course, there's some, people in every category who probably are doing something that's not right. But if immigrants are more law-abiding, why are they the target? And I think that, what we've been discussing is the answer. So I hope that answers your question. It's a good question.
Okay. How is it possible that people like immigrants do not have due legal process? And did this happen before, or does it only happen with the Trump administration?
Well, in a way, this connects to what we were talking about before about understanding the right history. And those of you who are understanding history, I hope you all are studying the real history. I don't know if you all listen to podcasts, but I make several historical podcasts, and I try to tell history that they try sometimes to hide, that people have hidden, because the story that I grew up learning about America was not true. The story was, well, America was always about freedom and democracy for everyone, and we all have equal rights, and that's what America is. And the only people who got put into jail were people who were bad, people who were hurting people. That's what I was told. It turns out that that's not true. What's true is that people just like yourselves from the time this country started fought for their rights. Women fought for their rights. Immigrants fought for their rights. People who were not, who were working class people and poor people fought for their rights. America did not start to help those people, unfortunately. It started because, initially it started as a colony of Britain, and the people who started the sort of founding fathers were not necessarily thinking about the people in this room. So the reason why this is an important answer is that this didn't start with Trump, and the whole fight of trying to build America is a fight that everybody's in. Your ancestors were in it, my ancestors are in it, and you're in it right now. And our job is to build and make this country something that everybody can feel safe in, that everybody can contribute to. That's ongoing work. America has never actually been that. Anybody who tells you America was that, and now it's going in a different direction, I want you all to use your history skills. I know y'all are sharp, and say, well, but what about this act? What about all these immigration acts before? What about the Chinese Exclusion Act? Why were Chinese people excluded from the country in 1882? It's like, and when you know the history, people can't trick you.
In the US, there are more weapons than people, and this is very strange for the Europeans to understand. How has gun violence influenced that way both authorities and people use them against immigrants or people who defend them, as we saw on TV in some cases?
Yeah, I mean, listen, it's strange to me. The question you're raising, I mean, the gun culture and the obsession with guns is like just amazing in this country. Like you said, I mean, guns, um, you know, there's so many guns in this country. People use them. Young people and all kinds of folks are being harmed. And I think that, one thing I would say is that uh, guns in a way they're weapons, and they're a form of solving problems by violence. And I hope that what you all are learning in class is that the smartest way to solve problems is almost never through violence. It should always be using your mind, trying to understand. Even when someone's very angry, sometimes if you can talk to them and say, hey, wait a minute, what's actually bothering you? You know what I mean? It's like has anyone in here, raise your hand if maybe you got frustrated one day and might have like raised your voice or yelled at your parents. Raise your hand if you've done that by accident, right? I've done that, you know what I mean? And then when I actually looked at it, I'm like, the reason why I yelled at my parent was because, really I was hungry, or I was too tired, or I was frustrated, and I dealt with it the wrong way. So then if someone can get to the root of that, they can solve the problem. But now if you try to solve it by fighting, or even worse, if you have a gun, then you're going to get actually what we have right now, which is people who solve problems with guns. And what I should say is, think about this, this class. You guys are so smart. You guys are doing this work. Think about this. You right now know that violence is not the way to solve problems, but our politicians and leaders don't know this. And what you see right now is that we're, unfortunately, as a country, we're at war in multiple countries because our president thinks violence is the way to solve problems. This is why I want you all to keep studying your history, to do everything, because guess what? At some point, our current president was in school just like you, and that means you one day can go and take over this country. And I know that you all are going to do something better, and I want you to do that. But anyway, yeah, in terms of guns, I mean, I just should also say guns are like, again, part of how gun culture grows is by making people scared. You make people scared. You tell them that they have to fear their neighbor, and then people get a whole bunch of guns. So it's like, anyway, yeah, there's so much to be said on that, but I want to get to the other questions.
To the New York University website, you have received the Union Democracy Communications Dallas Smith Award for your career and accomplishments and advocacy. What do you think of the role of media should be defending civil rights, and how do you know the mainstream media are doing this?
Yeah, I went to school and I studied media and how media works. That was what I studied to get my degrees first, and then I got my sort of advanced degree. I got a PhD basically in media studies, and I studied how the history of the communication system, why the communication system is the way it is, and then also like how to look at media in an interesting way. So like, have you all seen, sometimes I would look at a show, like, for example, has anyone ever seen the show Octonauts, like the kids show? I don't know if you've ever seen it. It's a show where like there's like these animals and they run around and they like saving other animals. They have like spaceships. It's called Octonauts. It's a cartoon. I have a 6-year-old daughter and she loves this show, right? And I like the show too. But when I look at the show closely, I notice some things. Like the people who are always in control have like a British accent. And the people who are like the characters who have to follow orders have like a Latino or Spanish accent. So there's a way where, even because I overthink something like a cartoon, I learned to ask questions and said, wait a minute, what happens if in a cartoon you never see someone who is like a Latino who's like a leader, or a black person who's a leader, or a woman who's a leader? After a while, that cartoon is teaching you the wrong message. So those are the kind of things I study. When it comes to race and immigration, I think those things are important. And I think media, that's one example of how media kind of like plays that role in like teaching people, because you're getting it through your cartoons, Who here has seen a cartoon who here has seen Paw Patrol? Raise your hand if you've seen Paw Patrol. Right? You like Paw Patrol? I like Paw Patrol, but what are the characters like? There's at least one Paw Patrol who's a police, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, so the one question we could ask is, right now in the real world, police are actually cooperating with ICE, but in Paw Patrol, something different is happening. So I think media can teach us a lot of different ways. And when I got the Dallas Smythe Award, the reason why is because I always try to use the media to tell the truth. I ask questions. I listen to people to figure out what the truth is. I don't want to make an assumption. And then I try to report the truth. So if the president is doing something wrong, I say, look, this is what the president is doing, and I try to always do that. And sometimes that has meant that I get a lot of criticism. I have even been arrested because of some of the things, that positions I've taken. But I always try to say my role as a journalist is, if we don't ever have journalists who tell the truth, then people won't know what's going on. The reason all of us partially know what's going on is because we've seen some of it in journalism. Now, some of us may have seen it in our own communities, but most of the stuff we learn from journalism. So I hope that some of you all become journalists and tell your story, because the last thing I say is that journalism is a place where your voice matters. Everybody in this classroom, each one of you has stories to tell and information that nobody else can tell. And if you're a journalist, then you can do that. And we really need it as part of our democracy.
Your bio also states there, are you a collaborator of Radio's Influentials Season 2, still white? Since most people in American jails are not white, why do you think this happens, and what should be done to prevent it?
Well, first of all, okay. Yeah. Well, first of all, I think actually, I think you should check the numbers, because it could be that most people in jail are white, but disproportionately there are people of color in jail. But yes, I made a podcast called Seeing White, which is about the history of whiteness, because when we say that word white, it almost kind of tricks us in a way, right? So I wanted to know, where did whiteness come from? Because look around, everybody hold out your hand. Right now, hold your hand out like the way I'm holding it, right? Is anybody's hand in this class white? No. You know how I know? Because look behind you at the wall. That wall, the upper part of that wall is white. Now look at your hand, right? It's not white, but that's what we call people. Somebody has put all of you into the same group and said your skin is white, but it's not. And my skin isn't white, but guess what? My skin also isn't black. It's brown. Most of your skin is brown. And actually, you all don't come from all the same places, right? What are some of the places? Just shout out the different places that you all come from. Where are, shout them out.
Well, Greece.
Greece, where else?
I'm from Santiago.
Where now? Santiago?
Yes.
Where else?
Venezuela.
Brazil?
Venezuela.
Right. So Venezuela, Greece, and you're all different places. You speak, those are at least two different languages, and your skin isn't white. Why would you be called white people? It doesn't make sense. So that's what we kind of explore, why people were grouped into this group called white, and how they use these racial categories to divide people, right? And to get people to say, like, because there are some people who would say, oh, if you have white skin, then maybe you should follow the policies of the government because the government is protecting white people. But then you have to say, well, why is the government locking up white people? And also, what are white people actually if all our skin color is not white? So that's what our podcast is about.
You mentioned cartoons that show racism indirectly with successful people being Anglo and white. How is the media influencing young people in schools through school media programs?
Well, I think that, social media, this is like anything else. I think, first of all, I should say, as a historian, since we're all historians together, there is a long history of representing people in ways that are incorrect, at least in the United States, and I think really all over the world. It's one of the, so like if you look at the old media, you'll see a lot of very demeaning images of black people. You would never see like a black president or like a black leader of a company, or like black leaders presented in a positive way. You would just see those same things. Same thing with women. I think this has probably changed recently, but even back in the day, they would say, oh, women, because they wanted, because the traditional culture and some of the people who were in power felt women shouldn't be leaders. You would only see women in like the kitchen and places like that. So that's historically. But right now, I think social media can challenge that in some places, and other places it's making it worse. I mean, I don't know if you all are on social media, but there's some really great stuff on social media where you can learn, and it's kind of funny, and people are doing all kinds of creative things. And then there's some really terrible stuff happening too. So I think the important point for you all is to remember that social media and the internet is just one source of information, but you also have what you learn in school. I think books and reading are important. My daughter, she's 6 and she already loves to read. And the smartest people are people who read. That's just the fact of it. So like, I think the goal is not so much, I mean, social media, there's always going to be different things, but I think the goal is for you all to just be passionate about your education. And the whole thing is, don't be tricked. Don't let anybody trick you. Make sure you get the real information.
You said fear is spreading through social media and Trump is taking advantage of this to spread lies about immigrants. How can we kids prevent fear from overcoming us?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very complicated. It's a hard question because on one hand, you want people to be free to communicate how they want on social media. We have freedom of speech in this country, and you want to, people should be able to communicate all kinds of different ideas. But it is true that there's a lot of disinformation and hateful views on social media. So I think some of this has to be, if you look at how other countries deal with this, there are much stronger regulations on social media in other countries. Basically, they're like, there's certain stuff that you can't just get away with putting online in some parts of Europe and other parts of the world. And I think that since we know that some of the people who created some of these social media platforms also have created, they were borrowing technology from things like gambling, and they really make it like it's very, they made the technology addictive on purpose. I don't know if hopefully everybody understands what addiction is, but have you ever had that feeling when you're on social media, the internet, like you just keep playing, or like a video game where you feel like you can't stop playing? That's because the people made it that way. So, and if you look at other countries, they basically have said you can't do that to people. Just like you can't sell any food, we're going to check the food. You can't just have anything on the internet. And so I think that that's part of how we can deal with that. But the biggest thing is it is in a way, I think, good old fashioned just being educated. Like, you all should, people are exposed to different kinds of people. If you're doing the things you're doing right now, which is talking to me, if you're like reading and really being informed, then I think even if you start to see some of these things online, you won't be as affected by it.
You said fear is spreading through social media and Trump is taking advantage of this to spread lies about immigrants. How can we kids prevent fear from overcoming us?
It's a great question. I mean, I'm sure you all understand what cyberbullying is. When I was in school, cyberbullying wasn't a thing because the internet wasn't really a thing when I was your age. I mean, bullying in all forms has to be, addressed. And I think that, all the things we've been talking about, history and making people scared of other people and using violence to solve problems, that does affect immigrants, in all kinds of ways. Think about one example I would give you is like what Trump did with the Somalian community in Minneapolis in Ohio. Trump and some journalists started spreading lies about Somalian people, saying Somalian people are terrible, they're dangerous. And then what happened was people started attacking Somalian people. In fact, a member of the U.S. Congress, Ilhan Omar, someone went to her press conference and sprayed something with her to attack her. But then you have online all the attacks and all the language that's happening. And all of that to me is part of the, consequences of treating people who are immigrants like they're criminals and spreading these lies. But again, I think you all are equipped to fix this. Like, you all are really smart. You know how to use social media, and I think you can put out different messages, and you can also, sometimes you also just have to turn social media off, right? Because and say, look, I'm not gonna be there. But all of this, I think it's a smart question, because it does affect immigrant communities. And then when people, and one consequence is, like, if you're scared to go online because someone is going to say horrible things about you or attack you or try to get your information and put your personal information in public, maybe you won't be online, and then you're missing out on things you need to access online. So yeah, it's a problem.
You are assistant professor at the Arthur L. Carter Journalist Institute at NYU and have developed different podcasts on issues like race and policing. How can you fight inequality, racism, and the recent attack by the Trump administration on immigrants from your position in the media?
Yeah, it's a great question. So what I've tried to do is, when we started to learn some of the things that Trump was going to do, a lot of journalists started putting the word out, because there's a lot of people in this country who don't pay attention to what the government is doing, right? Some of them are just not interested, and some of them are just busy, like if you're trying to survive. So the first thing we did was we put out a lot of stories and information, and some of those included like what they're planning to do. Which, as a journalist, we talk about people's rights and what your rights are. Sometimes as a journalist, we introduce people to groups that can protect their rights. So it's like, that's important. And then some of the really bad things that the government is doing, the only way you're going to learn about it is if a journalist reports on it. So right now there are people being kept, for example, in detention centers that are really, the conditions are bad, and people need to know. And the thing about journalism is, if you tell the story right, because there are a lot of people who are like, I don't care, whatever, I think they're criminals. But if you tell the story right and say, listen, this is what it felt like to be in this situation, sometimes you can move someone's heart, and then people will stand up. So I think there's a lot of things journalists can do, but they have to be courageous and committed to tell the truth. And I hope that you all will do that and be courageous, because it's definitely something you can do, and we need your voices.
Having written very interesting articles and done podcasts on civil rights, how do you plan to fight now and in the future against the actions of ICE and Donald Trump, and how dangerous can this be for you personally and professionally?
Well, I kind of answered the first part of the question about some of the things I'm doing. In terms of how it's dangerous personally and professionally, I mean, again, I think there is a certain level of risk. Trump has targeted journalists. There have been journalists who were like, documenting things that were going on, and they've been attacked either by the ICE agent or, they've been arrested. And also, once Trump says, like, this is a bad journalist, a lot of his followers might target that person online with cyberbullying. So there are some real risks. And then sometimes even institutions, like a company you work for, if they're scared of Trump, they might fire you, or they might try to say, hey, don't report that. So there's certainly some risks. I should say one of the reasons I became a professor is because professors have something that we're a right called academic freedom, where we're supposed to be able to have more freedom of speech in a way, like, well, it's not that we have more freedom of speech than anybody else, but it's that our jobs are configured so that, like, we're protected from some of those things. But what I would say is, to me, I think my only real protection is, number one, I always report what's true. And that means I have to sometimes, like, slow down and figure out, like, what is true. I don't always know what's true right away. Sometimes things look a certain way, and I try to check multiple sites and talk to sources and get as close to the facts as I can. because as long as what I'm reporting is true, that is a big protection, because people see, well, you're punishing him, but what he said was true. The other thing is that I work with a lot of other journalists and a lot of other faculty members. I'm in an organization called the American Association of University Professors, and I have a big community. It's like a big family of people around me. And I think that if people are looking at me to target me, they know I got a lot of family who's going to stand up for me if I'm reporting the truth. And so that's kind of what I do, but it's a little scary. And, but I also would say that, again, looking at history, people have shown courage. I'm like, look, it was scary for me, but how scary was it for someone who was fighting slavery? How scary was it for, the Mexican farm workers who had to go up against their bosses? And, someone like Dolores Huerta is like, if they could handle that fear, I can handle my own fear and risk.
Do you know anybody around you in friends, family, or your job that have directly suffered actions for the Trump administration for fighting against their police? Has anybody around you been fired or put in jail for their opinions or actions?
Well, yes. I work as a professor, and I've seen, this wasn't my work as a journalist, but there was a couple of years ago, some of my students were at a protest, and they were asking for the university to explain how it spends its money. And I joined that protest with them. And then the police came, and I said, I was at the protest to protect my students, but I'm also a journalist, so I was paying attention to what happened. And when the police came, I said, well, you can't arrest my students unless you arrest me too. And then they arrested all of us and took us downtown. So that's happened to me personally. But in terms of immigration, I would say, yeah, a lot of students and professors who have spoken out have faced consequences. AAUP, which is the organization of professors, we actually sued. We did a lawsuit against the Trump administration called AAUP versus Rubio, and we sued him for deporting Mahmoud Khalil. Mahmoud Khalil was a student at Columbia, and he was incarcerated, even though he had a green card, and he spent all this time, and as a result of being incarcerated, he missed the birth of his first child. So, but there's also people at CUNY right now. The CUNY University has people who have been fired according to some of these policies. And I know, it's like I'm always meeting someone who has a family member who's been detained by ICE. I don't know if any of you have family or community members who have, but it's like there's so many people. So I think yeah, it's real. We're at a point where, a lot of people know people who are impacted by this. And that's all the more reason for us to stand up and say, you can't do this to our community.
Since Trump began his second term, he has deported over 11 million undocumented immigrants, mostly from Latin America. In what ways do you think we can prevent these deportations or help these deported immigrants from now on?
This is a great question. I think I don't know about the numbers. I've heard different numbers of how many people Trump has deported. I've seen numbers ranging from like 2 million to some people talk about 200,000. But regardless of what the numbers are, it's a lot of people. It's too many people. The strategies that people are using are strategies people have used throughout history. One important strategy is the law. Of course, the ICE agents are not necessarily obeying the law when they grab people, but those cases then have to go to court. And, some people fight in the courts and they get judges to basically say this is illegal and you have to let this person out. So every time someone fights that way legally, a lot of times the Trump administration pushes back, but it sometimes does slow it down. There's a lot of cases where people have been freed because of lawyers and legal work. So that's one way that's important. Another thing that people have done is to protest, to get out in the streets and raise the name, raise the sort of awareness and say the people's names and make sure that their names are in the public. That happened with Mahmoud Khalil. right? Everybody learned his name. Maybe you heard his name because everybody came out and really protested and made it something that you can't ignore. So that's important. There are things that people are doing in terms of like, what we would call rapid response strategies, which is, I don't know if you all have heard about the whistles, but because some communities have distributed whistles to each other. And like, if there's an ICE agent in the area, someone blows the whistle a certain way. And what that does is like lets people know, like, oh, get out of this area. If your citizenship is in question, you want to get out of this area, or there's another whistle blow that says, if you're someone who can help, and like me, I was born here and I'm willing to take on some risk. Maybe I would go to the situation. It's like someone saying, hey, we're blowing the whistle because we need help, and it's just like the example I gave you with the numbers in the classroom. Sometimes when you have 20, 30, or 100 people surrounding like 2 ICE agents, sometimes the ICE agents let the people go. But ultimately, what has to happen is that we have to have a political change. We have to have different people in office who won't do this, who can be held accountable. And that's the only way you're going to get the change, the real scale. And then we have to maybe look at whether we even want to continue to have some kind of this massive police force that is so violent and doesn't obey the law. So those are all different strategies that people are doing. And the last thing I would say is that there's so many people who are incarcerated, Valentina, that you can support. Some people are supporting them by sending them letters and money and food, and just letting them know, like, don't give up and hold on, and we're trying to get you out. That's another way that you can be supporting people.
Well, if you had the opportunity to talk to Trump about this, what would you like to let him know?
I mean, I don't feel like Donald Trump is someone that listens to reasonable arguments from what I've seen, so it's hard to imagine what I would say. But I would simply tell him that, one, what you're doing is wrong. You haven't made anybody safer by what you're doing. You claim you're doing this for safety, but no one is more safe as a result of this. Immigrant communities are not safe. You're not targeting the groups that do the most kind of harm and crime. That's not happening because of this. You're actually producing more harm. I would also tell him, because Trump seems like he is someone who wants to be cool and wants people to like him. I would say these policies are really unpopular. Like, you're going to probably lose, the election. I mean, he can't run it again as president, but I would say, all the support that you think you have, you're losing it. Like, if you think about it, when Trump got elected, he had told the lie about immigration for so long that a lot of people believed it at the point when Trump got elected. But now I think his immigration policies are really unpopular. People don't like them. Even people that voted for him don't like it, because they said, I didn't want to have these people on the street. So I would remind Trump of that. And I just would say, listen, in the end of the day, you're a powerful person. You can affect people's lives. Don't you want to go down in history as someone who really helped people? Because if you do, you have to change course. And I guess, one other thing I would say, Valentina, is this. I would say, it's never too late to change your mind, because Trump, maybe he thinks that because he's gone this far down the road with this, or even like with his wars, that he has to go further. But, anybody can change their mind. All of us can, once we learn and realize you're wrong, if you're doing something wrong. There's been times in life where I was doing something that was wrong. Maybe I was treating someone a certain way, and I realized, you know what, I'm wrong. And I said, let me stop, let me apologize, and let me change the way I interact. And I would remind Trump that he can do that too. You can change. It's not too late. There's a lot of harm done, and you got to be accountable for that. But you can still be someone who affects history in a positive way. And all of you can, by the way, all of you can, throughout your lives, you can affect history in a positive way. You don't just watch it. It's not something you just watch on TV. If you look at the 1960s, there were kids that marched. There's all kinds of ways that young people have transformed the world. And so never let anybody tell you don't have any power.
Given the backlash Trump is facing due to all the injustice he's been committing, how do you think this will influence ICE deportations from this point forward? Or do you think they will continue until the end of his presidency?
It's a really good question. I think that it's likely that these things will continue to the end of his presidency. Just because there's been so much resources put into it. But I think that we can really affect, the movements that are pushing back against ICE in a variety of ways in different municipalities, the courts, and the rapid response networks. What they're doing is making it harder for ICE to operate. And now, I don't know if you all have heard of Miss Rachel for Littles. She's like, Miss Rachel is like she has a kids show on YouTube, and she's like a YouTube celebrity, but she has a kid. She's kind of like Mr. Rogers. I had the opportunity to meet Miss Rachel, and she has really spoken out against these detention centers, because what she's basically saying is no one should be detaining kids, putting kids in jail, basically. I mean, that's so hard to argue with. Of course, there are some people that do argue with her, but she's saying no one should put kids in jail. And she also has spoken out on what's going on in Palestine, basically saying like it's wrong to bomb kids. So I guess what I'm saying is, when you have people like that getting involved in the detention centers and getting people released, it's making it harder for them to do what they're going to do. But I do think that until we get different people in office, it's probably going to continue because they've already invested a lot into it.